Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, me and my friend Nick are going to be showing you how to make crispy skin roast pork, also known around the world as siew yoke. It only uses 2 ingredients and it's super simple to make. So Nick, how do we actually make this super crispy?
Okay, so let me start by saying it doesn't always use 2 ingredients only. There are many different ways to make this dish. Now, I'm a lazy chef, so I like to do it the simple way, but I've tried many different methods over the years, and I found that even though this is a very minimalist recipe, the results are spectacular if done right.
Wow.
So the first time I tried to make siew yoke, I googled it and I found a recipe that was founded by someone living in Hawaii, and it was left by some soldier after World War II. I tried it, but it was a bit too complicated, so I never tried to make it again. Years after that, I happened to live next door to a neighbor who was a chef, and somehow in one of our conversations, crispy skin pork came up, and he shared his recipe with me, which is the one I'll be showing you today. It's simple and the results have been magnificent. My friends all love it, and I hope you will too.
Wow, let's get into it.
Okay, so the first step is to get the pork really dry. So first thing you have to do is to wash that piece of a pork, and pork belly is the preferred cut. Try to find a piece that has just the right amount of fat. If you have ever had this dish before in a restaurant, you'll understand what is the right amount of fat. We're not talking about having a lot of fat, like you don't want half a layer of fat and then another half being the layer of meat. You're better off if the fat was probably only about 20 to 25% of the total meat.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's prepare this piece of pork now.
Okay, so we have already washed this piece, and the next step is to dry it thoroughly. So let's show you how it's done. So after washing the pork thoroughly, pat it dry. Now this is a very important part. I personally use kitchen towels because it's super absorbent, and you need to pat every side of your piece of pork belly dry. Don't be afraid to get into the grooves if you have an uneven piece of meat like we have here. So Carol, after drying it, the next step is really to either score or pierce the rind. Now, technically, I'm not sure why they recommend this step. I've actually done some Google research on it, and one of the theories is that by making holes in the rind, it allows some of the fat that's underneath it to come through in the cooking process, and that fat actually helps to virtually deep fry the rind on top and make it crispier. I don't know if that's true, but it seems to work, so let's do that. Word of caution. So I have seen butchers do it with the very sharp butcher knives, and they can score it very easily. But when I tried scoring it myself, none of my knives were sharp enough, even though I had really good knives. So I found it easier to pierce it using a stabbing motion than it was to try to score the actual rind. But it is a very dangerous process, because if you slip while holding the handle, you're going to end up gripping the blade instead. So the motion I suggest is to grip the knife like that, with your thumb on top of it, to make sure that there's no chance of your hand slipping into the blade. Now that you have scored or pierced the piece of pork, the next step is to marinate it, so let's begin. So Carol, I should take this opportunity to remind our viewers that you should always buy your pork from a reputable butcher. The reason is, I have a little story to share with you here. I actually didn't eat pork until probably my 20s. Wow. Because what I found out was the pork my mum was buying was from a very, very cheap butcher, and it used to smell. And I've only found out in my adulthood that that smell is called boar taint. It's because my mum was buying male pigs. Oh. Because it was a cheap butcher. Always use female pigs, and you always get that if you're going to a reliable butcher, and that removes the boar taint and makes it a lot more delicious.
So how does the butcher know?
A reputable butcher will only ask for female pigs.
Oh wow, so interesting.
Yes. So let's go on and talk about how we are going to marinate this piece with the 2 ingredients that we have. So the 2 ingredients that are required are salt and hoisin sauce. The hoisin sauce is for the meat, and the salt is to draw more moisture out of the rind, the skin, and also to basically add some flavor to it.
Okay.
Let's get on with it.
Yep.
So we always start by marinating the meat. the rind is the last part we have to handle. So Carol, hoisin sauce is what's needed for this section. Could you please coat it evenly with hoisin sauce and don't miss out on the sides either.
Okay, we shall put this on.
So you can use a generous amount here. Generally, you want to make sure that everything is evenly coated with a little bit of extra hoisin sauce. Carol, you've marinated this piece of meat really well. I can see even the sides are evenly covered, so now we have to work on the rind. So we start by flipping this back to the original side. And what we need now is salt. Lots and lots of it. So don't be shy. Start with what you have on that plate and we'll see if it's sufficient.
Okay. Whew, look at that salt, man. And what, do we just rub it in?
Yes, that's the only way to get it everywhere. Now, how much salt do we need? That's the question. Generally, you need enough salt to cover the entire rind, and it needs to be more than a layer thick because part of the salt is just going to dissolve and disappear pretty much. The salt does two things. First thing is it does add flavor to the whole dish, and secondly, it draws the moisture out of the rind, ensuring a very dry and crispy piece of pork when we're done.
Would it be really, really salty, or are we going to dust off?
We will
salt?
be dusting off the excess salt.
Wow. Okay. Because I cannot imagine eating this much salt. Is this enough?
Yes, that's quite sufficient.
So we're getting each and all the folds as well, right?
Yes. That may look like a lot of salt, but we are brushing most of it off before we cook. Now that it's salted and marinated, the next step is to wrap it up loosely with a bit of foil and to leave it in the fridge overnight because that helps to dry out the rind even more.
So why are we covering it up? Because I've seen many recipes leaving it open in the fridge.
So Carol, you can leave it uncovered in the fridge. It will actually dry it out even more. The reason I'm asking you to cover it is because number one, I don't like the smells of the fridge getting into the piece of meat, and I don't like the smell of the meat getting into my fridge as well. So that's why I recommend loosely covering it so that we get a bit of the drying effect, but without making the fridge smell like raw pork the next day.
Okay.
So a very loose covering is all that's required.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be airtight.
Yep. And we put it in with the tray, yeah?
Yes, I mentioned right at the start that I'm a bit of a lazy chef, so to avoid washing multiple dishes, I like to prepare on the tray that I'll ultimately be roasting it.
Okay, is this enough?
Yes, that should do.
Okay. Into the fridge.
Into the fridge.
Overnight.
Overnight.
Okay, wonderful. So what are we going to do next?
Okay, now that the pork is done, we've obviously just taken this out of the fridge, it's time to prepare for roasting. But a few steps need to be done to ensure that we're going to get a very crispy skin. So the first thing is, you might have noticed that the piece of meat has actually sweat a little overnight. You can either drain the water by pouring it out, or you can even try to absorb it using some kitchen towels. The other thing that should be done at this stage is to brush off any excess salt. And the quickest way to do that is to use a piece of kitchen towel to literally dust it off. I do not mind leaving a little bit of salt, so you might have that little bit left there. It does add a bit to the flavor. Now, yes, it will make the rind rather salty, but you must remember that the only saltiness coming from this entire piece of meat is from that bit of salt on the rind. So yes, the rind may be too salty, but it will be balanced out by the rest of the meat.
Okay.
Okay, so the final phase is the roasting phase. It needs to be done in two stages. You start with a really, really hot oven, and that has the effect of crisping the skin so that you get that crunch that we're after. When I say really hot, you're probably best to set the oven at 220 degrees Celsius, and that phase takes about half an hour to 45 minutes. It does vary from oven to oven. The next phase after that is to cook the rest of the meat, and that's done at 180 degrees, and it typically takes about another hour. So all up, the recommended cooking time is somewhere between an hour and a half to maybe an hour 45 minutes.
Okay.
When it's completely done, let it stand for about 5 minutes before transferring it to your cutting board.
Look at that. Nick?
Yums! Listen to that crackling. That's well done. The trick to cutting it easily is to flip it over . Time for the taste test, Carol.
Okay, let's see.
Cheers!
Cheers! Very crunchy.
How good is that crackling? You see all kinds of recipes online where they suggest pouring hot water over the rind and all that in preparation. You don't need any of that. As long as it's sufficiently dry and it's cooked at really high temperatures initially, that's the end result. Hope you've all enjoyed that. Good luck with your own cooking.